Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Welcome everybody, how are you all? You are fantastic. You're here and you're fantastic. And the two things go together. Because anyone interested in hearing the Shastra, or even not interested, but smart enough to drag themselves and put themselves in front of it where it's being recited, are great souls, any way you look at it. And I'm reading in the 7th canto. Today I'd like to review a verse from that 7th canto. And it's spoken by Narada Muni to Maharaj Yudhishthira, and it's in 7th canto, 10th chapter, 8th verse. 7:10:8. And we'll read the verse, and then we can have some discussion. Indriyani manak prana Atma dharmo dhritir matihi Hri shish tejas smriti satyam Yasya nashyanti janmana. Translation. O my Lord, because of lusty desires from the very beginning of one's birth, the functions of one's senses, mind, life, body, religion, patience, intelligence, shyness, opulence, strength, memory, and truthfulness are vanquished. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam, Kamam Hridrogam. Who knows where the verse is from? Kamam Hridrogam. 10th canto, yeah? Yes. Materialistic life, it's Vikriditam Vrajavadubi Aham Chavishnu. Materialistic life means that one is afflicted by a formidable disease called lusty desire. Liberation means freedom from lusty desires because it is only due to such desires that one must accept repeated birth and death. As long as one's lusty desires are unfulfilled, one must take birth again. One must take birth after birth to fulfill them. Because of material desires, therefore, one performs various types of activities and receives various types of bodies with which to try to fulfill desires that are never satisfied. The only remedy is to take to devotional service, which begins when one is free from all material desires. Anya bilashita shunyam. That's from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu 1.1.11. Anya bilashita means material desire, and shunya means free from. The spiritual soul has spiritual activities and spiritual desires, as described by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Mama janmani janmanishvare bhavatad bhaktir ahaitukitwai. From the Shikshashtakam. Unalloyed devotion to the service of the Lord is the only spiritual desire. To fulfill this spiritual desire, however, one must be free from all material desires. Desireless means freedom from material desires. This is described by Srila Rupa Goswami as anyabhilashita shunyam. As soon as one has material desires, one loses his spiritual identity. then all the paraphernalia of one's life, including one's senses, body, religion, patience, and intelligence, are deviated from one's original Krishna consciousness. As soon as one has material desires, one cannot properly use his senses, intelligence, mind, and so on for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Mayavadi philosophers want to become impersonal, senseless, and mindless, but that is not possible. The living entity must be living, always existing with desires, ambitions, and so on. These should be purified, however, so that one can desire spiritually and be spiritually ambitious without material contamination. In every living entity, these propensities exist because he is a living entity. When materially contaminated, however, one is put into the hands of material misery, Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi. If one wants to stop repeated birth and death, one must take to the devotional service of the Lord. Altogether, Sarvopadi Vinirmuktam Taprattvena Nirbalam Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhaktiruchate. Bhakti, or devotional service, means engaging all our senses in the service of the Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the master of all the senses. When the spirit soul renders service unto the Supreme, there are two side effects. One is freed from all material designations, and simply being employed in the service of the Lord, one's senses are purified. Side effects. Those are nice side effects. And then Prahlad Maharaj in his prayers to Lord Nrsingadev mentions that the cure for diseases in the material world is oftentimes worse than the disease itself. And notice nowadays there's a law that when a company, pharmaceutical company, comes up with a new drug, that they also have to list all the side effects. And I've seen actually that the list can go on for about a half an hour. They try to cover it over, but it just goes on and on. You could experience dry mouth, blood from your eyes, your ears start ringing, you could die. And I'm thinking, I'm not taking that stuff. I'll take some turmeric or something. No, I'm not against modern medicine at all, but there is a way in which there's danger in the material world, and there are side effects that are detrimental, even from the best laid plans, and even from trying to take medicinal remedies to cure the infirmities that come naturally in the body and mind, that there are side effects. But the side effects to performing devotional service, Prabhupada has, at the end of this purport, mentioned this verse, which tells the side effects of engaging in devotional service. Sarva upadi means the upadis, the false ways in which I falsely identify myself as something that I'm not. The upadis. An upadi is described by Jiva Goswami in the Tattva Sandarbha as, so we can have a visual image. If you take a clear crystal that is transparent, and next to it you put a red rose, you'll see that the crystal takes on a red, lustrous appearance. And similarly, my pure consciousness takes on various identities in association with matter, when I identify with matter. Sarvopadi vinirmuktam tapratvena nirmalam Hrishikena Hrishikesha. When one engages one's senses in the service of Hrishikesh, who's the master of the senses, then naturally the senses become purified of these upadis. So these are side effects. So, first of all, Prabhupada has mentioned in the purport something that I find to be fascinating and also a central point in the purport, which I'll bring up first. And that is that we are living entities, and therefore we always have desires. In the Bhagavad Gita, 3rd chapter, Krishna says, Nahi kaschit shanamapi jatutishyat karma krit karyate hyavasha karma sarva prakriti jairagunai. That the living entity is never inactive, but is always desirous and has volition. Then very simple terms, Prabhupada has said that the living entity is not a dead stone and never becomes a dead stone. So sometimes philosophers think that because there's misery in the material world, that one must end all activity and all desires. But Prabhupada is pointing out here the complete idea of liberation, which is not that just one becomes free of one's personhood and stops desiring altogether, which can be described as nirvana. There's a point at which the flame goes out, literally, and there's just nothing left. But this is not the philosophy of Krishna or the Bhagavad Gita. The living entity, the flame is always burning, but there are different coverings over the flame that reflect different kinds of light. But when one engages in one's original constitutional activity of devotional service to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then that ambition and the desire, which is radiating from the living entity, becomes purified. And one can actually express that full ambition in the process of devotional service. So, ambition means a strong desire to do or to achieve something, typically requiring determination and hard work. Desire and determination to achieve success. And it comes from Latin, ambitio, which means, from ambere, which means to go around canvassing for votes, which is kind of applicable nowadays because there's a campaign going on. And you see, it's a lot of hard work to get elected these days, and it costs a lot of money. But there's a lot of ambition behind it. It means you're actually doing something, you're putting yourself forward. So spiritual ambition means what? Putting Krishna forward, yeah. Actually, we'll talk about it in a minute. We'll go more into spiritual ambition in a minute. So, looking at the verse from the top, what did you notice about the verse or the purport that stuck in your mind so far, before we go into spiritual ambition? What aspects of it did you find interesting, concerned you, alarmed you?
I just remember that Prabhupada calls lusty desire as a formidable enemy.
Formidable enemy, yes. And where else does Krishna mention this formidable enemy? Third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, right? Because Arjuna asks, how is it that even against one's will, one's forced to go against the regulative principles and the kind of ideas that Krishna has mentioned in the third chapter? And what does Krishna answer? Kama esha krodha esha rajaguna samudbhava mahashano mahapatma vidyayenam ihavarinam. He calls this lust, he says, kama, translated as lust, is the all-devouring sinful enemy of the world. And he says also something very helpful, which is that it's born from the mode of passion, from Rajagun. When one touches the mode of passion, then naturally this effect comes about, Rajagun. So you mentioned that it's a formidable enemy, lust. What other things did you hear? Yes.
The definition of desirelessness.
What is it?
The definition of desirelessness, that
Yes.
it is freedom from material desires.
The definition of desirelessness is freedom from material desires. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj, for the nice verse. I like when Prabhupada started beating Mayavadis, and just seeing that how Prabhupada is so keen that there can no be any screwed meaning can be taken out, and he's always alarmed to save us, safeguard from the Mayavadi comments.
So what did he say about the Mayavadis?
Like how the desirelessness and they think that no activity is required, and you just stop all the activities.
Okay. Thank you. What else?
There's also a mention about the side effects.
Yes.
that you alluded to by these pharmaceutical companies, and that for instance, they have these insecticides for the plants. So as you put on them, the plant itself dies. See, it is supposed to take away all the flies and insects, but the plant itself extinguishes.
Yeah.
So
And
the
side effects also another phrase is unintended consequences that tend to be detrimental. Yes. Please pass the mic then. Okay?
Thank you. What stuck in my mind is from the very beginning. The reason why it stuck in my mind is because people wonder why we're here in the material world. My understanding from reading is that we wanted to be Krishna, and Krishna says no, but we want to be you. And he said, well, here's the material world. So I'm wondering, you have free choice. You're in your natural position. Why did we want to be him? What is that the first? I guess that's the first mistake. So that's the very beginning. Is that correct? Because that's
Yeah.
my understanding of why there's a material world and why we're here. So from the very beginning.
It's a nice facility for us to experience material desires or to express our material desires.
But what I'm saying, how did we go? I understand free choice. I guess I'm just not getting it. How did we want to be him?
Because we're not dead stones. And the living entities have volition, which means they have desires. And they have also free will, which means free will means that you have to have the opportunity to use your desires and also misuse your desires. That's what free will means. You have to have the right to make the wrong choice.
If there's the right to make the wrong
Okay.
choice. Actually, that struck me as well from the beginning of one's birth. That shows the potential eternality of our desires continuing in the wrong direction. That from the minute we're born, as long as we're not purified, this is the result.
Yeah, well, we can see that many of those desires are there latent, which means that they've not yet manifested. Because sometimes people see a young child, a baby even, and say, oh, pure as the driven snow. But then as the baby develops, then its natural proclivities awaken. And even after the destruction of the entire universe, Bhagavatam explains that the living entities are wound up within the body of Mahavishnu after a Mahakalpa and the material world is destroyed. But the living entities are in suspended animation, and after they are readmitted into the material world through the exhalation of Mahavishnu, Supersoul, who's within every living entity, then reminds them of their previous ambitions to enjoy the material world, so they can start over again. Asau gunamayar bhaver bhuta sukshmendriyatmami swam nirviteshu nirvishto bhunkte bhuteshu tad gunan. Can we look at that verse? You know where it is? 1, 2, 30. Asau gunamayar bhaver bhuta sukshmendriyatmabhi swam nirmiteshu nirvishto bhunkte bhuteshu tad gunan. Translation: the supersoul enters into the bodies of the created beings who are influenced by the modes of material nature and causes them to enjoy the effects of these modes by the subtle mind. You want to say it all together? The supersoul enters into the bodies of the created beings who are influenced by the modes of material nature and causes them to enjoy the effects of these modes by the subtle mind. Srila Prabhupada's purport. There are 8,400,000 species of living beings, beginning from the highest intellectual being Brahma down to the insignificant ant, and all of them are enjoying the material world according to the desires of the subtle mind and gross material body. The gross material body is based on the conditions of the subtle mind, and the senses are created according to the desire of the living being. The Lord, as Paramatma, helps the living being to get material happiness because the living being is helpless in all respects in obtaining what he desires. He proposes, and the Lord disposes. In another sense, the living beings are part and parcels of the Lord. They are therefore one with the Lord. In the Bhagavad Gita, the living beings in all varieties of bodies have been claimed by the Lord as his sons. The sufferings and enjoyments of the sons are indirectly the sufferings and enjoyments of the Father. Still, the Father is not in any way affected directly by the suffering and enjoyment of the sons. He is so kind that he constantly remains with the living entity as Paramatma and always tries to convert the living being toward the real happiness. Asau gunamayir bhavir bhuta sukshmendriyatmabi swa nirviteshu nirvishto bhunkte bhutishu tad gunan. Very powerful verse explaining how the Lord facilitates everyone here in the material world. And in our verse today, we find out that the real purpose of the human life is to purify this kama and transform it into something else. We know this because we understand the overall philosophy is that we have this activity, volition, desire, and it can't be extinguished, but it can be purified and also directed in the service, directed toward the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So in the beginning, the practice of devotional service, one may not have purified senses, but as one engages in the activities of devotional service, gradually, as a byproduct, one's senses become purified as one performs the practices of devotional service. And there's a gradual clearing of the consciousness. And as the consciousness clears, it's not that the soul becomes inactive or passive, but actually there's an ambition, a great ambition that the soul has, and that soul can then go on to develop that ambition, to pursue the ambition, which has to do with service, eternal service in relationship to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the enemy then is something that we should be acquainted with. And Prabhupada mentions this in military terms near the end of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where he says that when you're fighting a war, you should know where the enemy lies. And in the outset of this purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions how kamam hridrogam, materialistic life, means that one is afflicted by a formidable disease called lusty desire. So the enemy is like a disease, and it's called lusty desire. I think this verse is from, if you can find it, Vikriditam vrajavadubhyarham cha Vishnu, shadhanvito nashrunayat atavarna yedya, bhaktim param bhagavati pratilabhya kamam hridrogam ashvapahinot yacharena tira. If I'm not mistaken, this is what he's referring to in this purport. The disease is called the dread disease of the heart, or kama. And then the cure is mentioned in the 10th chapter, 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which we'll have within 30 seconds or less, or your money back from this class today. Vikriditam vrajavadubhyaham cha Vishnu. And the verse says that when one hears about the Lord Krishna's activities, then vikriditam vrajavadubhyaham cha Vishnu, shradhanvito, with faith, shradhanvito nashrinuyad, one hears about it, nashrinuyad atavarna yedya, bhaktim param bhagavati pratilabhya kama. One is able to come to the highest stage of bhakti by hearing. Hridrogam ashpa pahinot yacharena dira, and very quickly one is able to overcome the dread disease of the heart, which is kamam, which is lust. And one overcomes the affliction. So, the importance of this and the process for identifying what that lust is mentioned in various places in the Bhagavad Gita. So one of the important verses in the Bhagavad Gita that talks about this affliction and how it starts and continues is in the 2nd chapter. And it begins, Jayato Vishayan Pumsam Sangasteshu Pajayate. And that happens to be verse number 62. Bhagavad Gita 62. Did you find my verse? Yes. Okay. We're one verse behind, but that's okay. We'll catch up. So this verse, let's look at it together. Jayato Vishayan Pumsa Sangasteshu Pajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kama Kamat Krodho Bijayate. So the verse says, while contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment lust develops, and from lust anger arises. Now I'll read the purport, and we can listen to how one becomes entangled in the material downward cycle. One who is not Krishna conscious is subjected to material desires while contemplating the objects of the senses. The senses require real engagements, and if they are not engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, they will certainly seek engagement in the service of materialism. In the material world, everyone, including Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, to say nothing of other demigods in the heavenly planets, is subjected to the influence of sense objects. And the only method to get out of this puzzle of material existence is to become Krishna conscious. Lord Shiva was deep in meditation, but when Parvati agitated him for sense pleasure, he agreed to the proposal, and as a result, Kartikeya was born. When Haridas Thakur was a young devotee of the Lord, he was similarly allured by the incarnation of Maya Devi, but Haridas easily passed the test because of his unalloyed devotion to Lord Krishna. As illustrated in the above-mentioned verse of Sri Jamunacharya, a sincere devotee of the Lord shuns all material sense enjoyment due to his higher taste for spiritual enjoyment in the association of the Lord. That is the secret of success. One who is not therefore in Krishna consciousness, however powerful he may be, in controlling the senses by artificial repression, is sure ultimately to fail, for the slightest thought of sense pleasure will agitate him to gratify his desires. Tadrikta matayo means, which verse is that? Yet palava, I'm sorry, yet pada palava, pankaja palasa vilasa bhakta, karmashrayam gatitam udgatayanti santa, tadvanna rikta matayo yatayo pirudha, shrotoganastam arunam bhajavasudevam. This is a parallel verse which says, the devotees who are always engaged in the service of the toes of the lotus feet of the Lord can very easily overcome hard-knotted desires for fruitive activities, because this is very difficult. The non-devotees, the jnanis and yogis, although trying to stop the waves of sense gratification, cannot do so. Therefore, you are advised to engage in the devotional service of Krishna, the son of Vasudeva. This verse mentions how Shrotoganas, there are very strong waves that sweep across the consciousness, even the jnanis and yogis. and dissuade them from their practice. Whereas bhaktas, because they're charmed by the lotus feet of the Lord and they have this loving sentiment towards Him, can overcome that in the service because they're so engaged in service of the Lord. So this verse from the Bhagavad Gita, which I just read, Dhyayato Vishayan Pumsam, indicates that there's a way of contemplating the objects of the senses with material desires, and there's a way of contemplating the objects of the senses without material desires. And let's discuss the difference between the two and the result of the two. Because in the beginning sentence of the purport, Prabhupada mentions, when you contemplate the objects of the senses and you have material desires, then you'll become connected and entrapped by them. Yes.
So when Srila Prabhupada said that by developing a higher taste, we can detach ourselves from the material desires, I remembered the verse, which is, I think, prior to this, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasavarjam rasapyasya param drishtva nivartate. And it means the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment through this, though the taste for sense object remains, but ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness.
And how are you relating that to this concept of contemplating the objects of the senses and becoming overwhelmed if you have material desires, or contemplating the world, the objects of the senses, but not becoming overwhelmed?
So what this verse is saying is that though one may be restricting oneself from the association with the sense objects, and the material desires may still remain within the heart, by cultivating a higher taste above such material enjoyment, one will be able to not be engaged with those sense objects.
Okay, well, it's interesting because there's a difference in the way I look at the world. If I have material desires, what does it actually mean? I have a misconception that there's something in it for me, that this is mine. This is for me to enjoy. And if I look at it with that idea, then I can become captured by it in a sense. I develop what the verse says is a sangha, sa'anga. I become one with that thing. I think this is mine. You look at it and you say, this is for me, this is mine, and now you got a problem because now you're connected to it, and it's inferior nature, it's inferior matter. So there is a way that one may look at the world, one may look at the objects of the senses in this world and not feel like that. One might look at the world as in a different way. And what is that different way that one looks at the world and sees the same objects of the senses that a person with material desire sees, but doesn't become entangled in those objects of the senses? What is that? And where does that come from? Yes.
One thing came in my mind when you were discussing that verse, Kama Esha Krodha Esha Rajoguna Samadbhava. Like in the Nectar of Instruction, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur mentioned, like when we want to develop material desire, there can be two effects. One is the attachment, and one is the anger. So Abhirodha Priti and Birod Jukta Krodh. So these are the two interpretations of material desires. But in Chaitanya Chaitamrita, Krishna Das Kaviraj Goswami says, like Attindriyo Pritivancha Bolitare Kam, Krishnindriyo Pritivancha Dharanam, Dhare Premanam. So when we substitute that last with love, which is actually serving to the Krishna or satisfying the senses of Krishna rather than own senses, then only we can actually get rid of the effect of the material desires, or we can have the higher taste which we're desiring for.
Good. You described some of the effects. Something of that kind of attachment then can degrade into anger, which is part of the process. And you also gave a redefinition that one thing is called lust and the other called love. The similar kind of energy or emotion that's being expended, but because one thing is one has Atmendriya Priti, which means one has love for one's own senses and thinking this is for me, my satisfaction. And the other one is Krishnendriya Priti, which means one has love for Krishna's senses. And that's called prema. The other one's called lust. So, but what I want to know is what's the psychology behind it? When I'm looking at the world, what is that particular psychology that allows me to look at the world and not become entangled in it and also not reject it as false? Because we already mentioned a verse, although I didn't go into it in minute detail, about how yet pada punkaja palasha vilasa bhaktya. The devotee is engaged in thinking of the Lord's pastimes and gets pleasure from that. Whereas rikta matayo, those who are without devotional service, especially the Mayavadis, they're called rikta matayo. They've lost their heads. They have no conception of anything positive, and therefore they have nowhere to go to escape the waves of material desires that come in. But Harivamsha Prabhu is going to tell us a little bit about the psychology behind it. We want to know this a little bit, some realized knowledge, some of the subtle psychology, so that we can fortify ourselves as we're moving about the world. Help us out.
I'll just repeat your words, which I heard in your classes. So, a Krishna conscious or spiritual person, when he sees the things around himself, first he recognizes this is real, this is Krishna's energy. He doesn't deny that as a non-real substance as the Mayavadis do. That's real, but it's the Bahiranga Shakti of Krishna. And then, because he is Krishna conscious, he knows that he is servant of Krishna and everything belongs to Krishna. Bhuktaram Yagyatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. So, it's meant for the enjoyment of the person who possesses them. So, it's enjoyment for Krishna. So he first of all understands the relation of the material energy with Krishna, and then he invokes that, he is meant to facilitate Krishna enjoyment using those material energy or the material phenomena.
So there's a little bit of analysis that goes on, you're saying. Or a person's more oriented towards seeing the world as connected to Krishna, right? So one word that I'm thinking of right now in relationship to this verse, which we've brought up in other classes before, is a concept related to the concept of deliberation. And after deliberating, and one of the features of deliberation is that one becomes aware of consequences. When you deliberate on something and you discuss, okay, what will happen if I go in this direction? What will happen if I go in that direction? Doesn't this verse make us aware of consequences? Like if you step there, you're going to sink. Like quicksand. You know, some people know what it looks like and they just say, if you step in there, you're not going to get out. There were some incidents when we were at the Ganges this year in Mayapur, when some of the devotees went to take a bath and they walked in a certain area and then they got stuck. They sunk down to their waists, actually. And it really required some work to pull them out again. And once you know about that spot, you know about the consequences of walking in there, you'll be a little bit careful. So doesn't this verse also talk about consequences? Jayato vishayan pumsam sangasteshu bhajayate. What Harivamsa Prabhu mentioned to us, the devotee through, I'm just extrapolating a little bit, but by deliberation, which we put the sambandha gyan, or discussion about our relationship with Krishna and our relationship with this world, in the category of deliberation. We have to deliberate about what is our situation here, and we have to therefore become very much aware of the consequences of our activities in this world. And one of the ways in which the devotee becomes aware of consequences is hearing from Krishna that if you meditate on the objects of the senses, Jayata Vishyam Pumsam Sangasteshu Bhajayate, you'll become attached to them. Has anybody ever experienced that before? In some way? Yes? You want to tell us about it? Or mention the psychology? Not really. I mean, you know, it could be like a really simple thing. There's an after effect. If you look at something and you consider it for a minute, you might even turn away and then the mind goes, wait a minute, I want that back. It kind of follows you. There's a way that the internet programmers nowadays have become very expert at mimicking this feature. Are you doing that? Any of you? Because it's really interesting. What happens is, say if you go shopping on the internet and you look at a jacket and then you say, no, I'm not interested, or maybe some other lifetime. Then you go back to whatever else you were doing on another page, then all of a sudden that jacket will show up. It's like, hey, you wanted this blue jacket, right? Then you go to some other completely different website and the blue jacket will follow you there. Along with the pair of shoes you looked at last week. Along with tickets for the symphony. I mean, whatever you look at, it sort of starts piling up, and there's a little column on the side saying, here's all the things you want, right? Just follow it. And all I did was look at it once. That's on your permanent record. That's on your Google record, actually. When they'll go in there and they can look at it, make a composite, and say, this is what this person wants. And there's a way, the sophistication in material nature is like that also. There's a way in which whatever we look at, whatever we consider, we say, yeah, I think I'll take that, and then I'll walk away. But you don't exactly walk away. It kind of follows you around. That subtlety is there, right? Who had their hand up? What's that? Yes, Malini?
Guruji, I was...
You're going to come clean. You're the one programming these things.
Actually, for one of the hackathon projects, this was our theme that when you have an iPhone, there is an app, there are some kind of APIs that you can use that can see what kind of music you're listening to, what kind of, how much you're running. So depending on if you're walking a lot, they record all that data. And when you come up to any shopping site, they will say, you need a running shoes now, or this is a new album that's coming up that you need. So that's...
Yeah, it's very similar, isn't it? Doesn't it remind you of your mental process where you look at the world and then all of a sudden those same desires keep coming up and the residual effect of them is there? Yes.
I had personal experience, like we were trying to purchase some car for Siddha Mataji, and I see that we decided on some car, and I see that whenever I stop car, I will see that car in behind me, or like, this car we have wanted to take. So wherever I followed, I see that, okay, I'm able to see the same car though. So I see that how that continues that concept, and finally we purchased that car, but it's just...
Yeah. Okay, we have from the internet, and then you want to say something about the psychology of attachment? Is that you?
Talking to me?
Yeah, I'm talking to you. Okay, give from the internet, and then Satyadeva will wind up. Give him a microphone.
It's Rasprad Prabhu.
Rasa Prada, wow.
Hare Krishna Gurudev, please accept my sincere and heartfelt obeisances and dandavats. All glories to Srila Prabhupada and to you as well. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Maya is in the stalking every second of our existence, and that is her mission. If we pay attention to her little by little, she will push us away from our bhakti. But if we have the desire and the willingness to work hard in our sadhana and follow the principles, our heart and minds start purifying and will help to be more firm and determined in our position in bhakti yoga. And the side effects will be all favorable to our spiritual life. So I think that's the reflection.
He gave us an essay, practically. We could publish that and distribute it. Thank you, Rasa Prada. That was beautiful. Okay, Satyadeva Prabhu, you want to say a little bit about the psychology behind this material attachment? Or any other direction you want to go?
Well, the psychology, I think the devotees already mentioned. The material psychology is coming from the mode of ignorance. It causes us to imagine that we're separate from Krishna. And so we see ourself as an independent, separate entity that has no reliance or any separation, any connection with our source, which is Krishna. And so when we look at anything in the material world, we see it through this imaginary person, not the person we really are, but we see everything in terms of our material identity. Just like, grossly, I think I'm an American, or I think I'm from San Francisco, and I want the 49ers to win. And when they win, it's my team, and I'm happy. And when they lose, I'm unhappy. So I'm viewing that through my false identity. And so I'll see everything in relationship to that identity, whatever I see. If I see myself as a man, then I'm an enjoyer of a woman, or vice versa. But whatever we see, it's not as it really is. We see it through this false, imposed delusion we're under. But if we understand, not intellectually, but through realization, through direct experience, that I'm part of Krishna, then we see not only ourselves as part of Krishna, but we see everything else is also part of Krishna, and not as separate. If I see myself as separate from Krishna, then I'll see everything else also as separate from Krishna, and therefore potentially mine. I think the whole conundrum is explained very nicely in the invocation of Ishopanishad, where the invocation says that everything, that the Supreme Whole is complete, and that everything that emanates from the Supreme Whole is also complete. And Prabhupada explains in the purport that all sense of incompleteness, this feeling of incompleteness that we have, is due to incomplete understanding of our relationship with the Supreme. So this is where lust comes from. The lust is coming from this feeling that I'm incomplete, and I need something outside of myself to feel complete. And as soon as we forget our relationship with Krishna, then we feel incomplete. And that's the whole problem we have. So the solution is to recognize factually, experientially, how Krishna's the source of our life. And when we realize that, we feel complete, and so spontaneously we're not feeling incomplete, and we're wanting out of gratitude, out of love, to serve Krishna. We're not serving out of a sense of incompleteness, we're serving out of a sense of completeness. So the way I understand the psychology of lust is that I'm feeling incomplete because I'm ignorant of who I am and my relationship with Krishna. And if I understand my relationship with Krishna, I won't feel incomplete, and therefore there's no lust.
Thank you very much. Ijo desu ka?
Ijo.
Hai. So there's a way in which Krishna talks in the Bhagavad Gita about if one becomes affected by the idea that one can enjoy the material world, famous verse, Bhogaishvarya prasaktanam taya prahita chetasam. Vyavasayatmaka buddhi samadao navadiyate, means that if one has this idea that I can enjoy the world, Bhogaishvarya prasaktanam taya prahita chetasam, that and is bewildered by it, one really can't think very deeply about one's spiritual self or about Krishna. That samadhi means that one cannot completely give one's attention to Krishna, to devotional service. So what is the solution? We've just barely touched on the psychology of this frustrating experience that the senses are programmed to go after their objects, and the mind has a lot of previous impressions in it from a lot of different shopping sprees throughout the universe, in which the images keep popping up here and there and offering themselves over and over again. In a way, this universe really is set up in such a way that we learn something, and that is that when I touch the objects with the wrong intention, there are consequences. And in a sense, it's booby-trapped. You know what a booby-trap is? It's a trap, sensitive trap they used to use in wartime. You step in a certain place, you touch the wrong thing, and then something falls on you, or you get... Huh? Yeah, landmine is definitely kind of a booby trap. I mean, there's all kinds of treacherous things that you can step in during war now, because the weaponry is so advanced. So the universe is set up like that, in a sense, to teach us to be careful, to keep our hands in the window and not flail about and just look here, there, and everywhere. Because once we start realizing that I'm causing this increase of agitation in the mind and the various desires that are popping up because of the way I'm looking around without any purpose to serve Krishna, then I become a little more careful about the way I conduct myself in the world. So when one understands this principle, there is a recourse, and that is that one can begin to train one's senses in devotional service. And it's not that instantly one can simply turn away from the sense objects, but by purifying the senses through the practice of rules and regulations in devotional service, gradually the senses become attracted to Krishna, very gradually. So there's a few very helpful ways in which we can move forward on that path of purification. First thing is to understand that there is a path that's been chalked out by previous masters who have had complete success. And as I mentioned in a previous class, which was entitled How to Outsmart a Genius. Do you remember that class? How to Outsmart a Genius? Well, I'm glad you don't remember, because now I can say it again. Okay. Thank you for remembering. Two of you. So, how to outsmart a genius is to have a good plan. You don't have to be a genius to take the devotional service. You don't have to be advanced in any other way except that you're willing to follow the plan that's been given by the previous acharya. So that will allow you to outsmart a genius. There's lots of geniuses around that think their way out of surrendering to Krishna. Taya prahita chetasam. They're so smart that they think that they can do a better job than Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. And they can't. But those who are simple and sincere and just understand this basic fact, and that is that Krishna's the authority, and those who speak on behalf of Krishna, the acharyas, are his representatives, and if I follow them, then I'll be successful, even if I'm not a big shot. You don't have to be a big sadhu. Prabhupada likes to say you don't have to have a big beard. You don't also have to have 4 arms, sometimes he said. You don't have to be an avatar. You just have to be sincere and follow the plan that's been given. So the way to outsmart a genius is to follow a plan that's given by the highest authority. Follow the plan that's given by the highest authority, by the masters of devotional service. And one of the ways that is recommended to follow a plan, any plan, was given by a very modern philosopher, Ogmandino, and he said, never greet the dawn without a map. That's a good mantra. Write it down. Never greet the dawn without a map. You have to have a plan when you wake up in the morning to follow a certain course. Otherwise, the mind and senses will follow their own course, won't they? You get up and your mind might suggest so many things, like what? Facebook. And once you go on Facebook, there's a lot of different twists and turns you can take and come out of it 7 hours later and so forth in a stupor. But if you have a written plan that you'll follow the basic tenets given by the masters of devotional service for prosecuting bhakti yoga in the morning time, and you follow a few basic things, then you start yourself off on the right track early in the morning. What are a few of the basic things that you can do when you wake up in the morning to get yourself on the right track, to overcome this tendency to enjoy the material world and to then become captured by lust? Chant? Chad. What is Chad? For the benefit of our listeners all over the world, you've recommended something that sounds rather interesting. Chad.
It's chapter a day, reading one chapter of Bhagavad Gita.
Okay. Do you have experience with this?
Yes.
Can you tell us about it? How does it help you? And what ways has it been? Is it a struggle to do it? Is it a austerity to take it up? Does your mind want to do something else, but you enforce this rule within your mind? Your intelligence takes over. Tell us something about it. How has it helped you?
I started doing it at 6:30 a.m. in the morning, just as a motivation to get up early as well. And my day feels very fulfilled when I do it. Now I think there are some devotees. We started a group and it's called Vaisesika, and we do it 4:45 a.m. We do it for 15 minutes. It's difficult, but I can do it 2 or 3 times a week. Those 2 or 3 days of my week are stupendous. I mean, they go really very nice. I feel pure. I feel I've accomplished something even at work, and I feel I have so much energy, and the trash work that I was doing post 10 p.m. or 11 p.m., I don't do any of that now. So in the morning I can do my...
You have spiritual ambition.
Yeah, that's one.
Yeah, I could feel it coming from you. You know, when you're talking about people who have ambition, for instance, in the material world, they go to bed early or they do what they have to do to get up. I remember Mike Millikan, who is the junk bond king. He became very, very wealthy. But he lived in Los Angeles. He had to get up early in the morning to trade in New York because it's 3 hours earlier. You know Mike Millikan, right? So he was so ambitious, he'd be up at 2 a.m., you know, to start getting ready for trades all day long and things like that. This material ambition. And you make sacrifices when you have other people who are materially ambitious, like maybe athletes. I've seen you're nodding your heads. You might know something about it or have done it yourself, right? That it requires some sacrifice. So Prabhupada has mentioned in the purport we read today that when you begin to advance in devotional service, you become spiritually ambitious. And what you just said, you mentioned previously, you know, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, other things to do. Now you're ambitious because you're thinking, I want that direct experience with Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. And it is a direct experience. So this is a very practical thing that she's mentioned, is you can commit yourself to a plan, which was recommended by Srila Prabhupada many times, which the Shastra says you should do every day. And that is to recite at least one chapter of Bhagavad Gita every day. So she mentioned it as Chad. That's a underground secret group called Chapter a Day, Chad. And there are many card-carrying members around the world who do this every single day. So this is a kind of spiritual ambition, isn't it? And because to do it every day, no matter where you are, sometimes you're in the car, you're late. If you don't do it now, you know, you'll be up late at night, so you tell your spouse or your friend, I have to do my chapter of Bhagavad Gita now while we're driving. Do you mind? And it's like you're just driving to some place, to the store or something, and say, okay, go ahead. And then it changes the whole environment. And you keep that also, when you have this spiritual ambition to chant one chapter of Bhagavad Gita a day and say that you've done it 3 times in a row, then the 4th time it becomes more compelling because you don't want to lose your streak, right? And when you get it up to like 34 times or 60 times, then you definitely don't want to break your streak. You want to keep going. So that was very practical. What else? What are the other kinds of things that you can do early in the morning that help you to overcome lust, to become spiritually aware and conscious, and to develop a taste for the spiritual energy? A few hands, yeah?
I've recorded some selected verses from Bhagavad Gita with their translations. So while I'm driving, I just play them over and over again.
Okay, so you can record transcendental verses and then you can play them, right? All right. What else?
You can sing some of the ashtakams that you...
You can sing ashtakams, okay? Yeah. Who can stop you? The ashtakam police, yes. What else?
Prabhuji, offering obeisances to one spiritual master, Prabhupada, and offering it obeisances also to the earth. I know one of your lectures you recommended. That way you develop the spirit of that you are the servant, and at least intellectually you are telling yourself.
In fact, and part of the Panchatrik Vidhi is when you open your eyes in the morning, you don't. The first thing that you do is you say something transcendental. There are verses that you can say. You can chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Then the Panchatrik Vidhi gives, when you step out of bed, you put your right foot, before you put your right foot on the floor, you tell Mother Bhumi, please forgive me for stepping on your surface. And then you offer your obeisances to your spiritual master. And you start the day like that. You get some momentum. Okay, so a couple more. Somebody talk about chanting, yeah.
Read Srila Prabhupada's books.
Read Prabhupada's books, yeah. And so if you have a set number of pages that you're going to read every day, that's best. Because Sankhya Purvaka Nama Gana Natibi, the Goswamis set this example that they counted how many pages they did every day. So don't just do whatever you feel like, because then the mind will gradually take you in another direction, but stick to a set plan. If it's 1 page, fine. But do it every day, be consistent, and follow the plan. Get a plan and write it down also, and then post it and say, this is what we do here. Senses, mind, everybody, this is our plan that we're on, how to outsmart geniuses all over the world. By following Krishna's plan, following the Master's plan, that's how you outsmart a genius. And if you follow that simple formula of using your morning time to be in touch, tat karma pavartana, with these varied activities which are highly recommended by the acharyas, that chanting Hare Krishna on beads with attention, then one will develop spiritually very quickly by that, okay? So follow a plan and never greet the dawn without a map. Don't make that mistake to wake up and go like, oh, whatever happens today, that's okay. Make sure you have your plan written down on a little map, so when you wake up, you go, this is what we're doing today. Is that possible? Do you have a little map? Could you draw one up tonight if you don't have one? Try it tonight. Even if you already have an idea of what you do, you can refine it a little bit more, but make yourself a little map before you go to sleep tonight, even if it's just one sentence of what your intention and purpose is, to follow the masters, to follow Krishna when you wake up in the morning, and see what happens. It's homework, okay? So the next thing is that to develop the attitude of a servant. Because, as Satyadev Prabhu mentioned, the root cause of one's puzzlement, probably use the word that one becomes puzzled by this contact with material nature, is solved by recognizing that one's a servant. You could just say, I'm a servant of Krishna. Try that. Jiv Krishna das e bishwas korleto artuko nai. If you develop this attitude that I'm a servant of Krishna, then Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, you won't have any more trouble, no more misery. The dukkha goes away because I'm a servant of Krishna. And the beauty of that is we are servants of Krishna, and that's our constitutional position. And in a famous verse in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, which Satyadev Prabhu is indirectly or directly referring to in his explanation of the psychology of attachment, Bhayam dvitiya abhinibeshata syad ishad apetasya viparya yosmritihi. That the fear and illusion is caused by this sense of separation from Krishna. When I think that I'm not connected to Krishna, then immediately fear arises, as Satyadev Prabhu so nicely explained. And then it's just so interesting that the solution is given in the same verse. First of all, the cause is apetasya viparya yosmiti. I'm turned in the wrong direction. And the wrong direction is that I think that I'm the enjoyer. And I have some optimism about myself becoming successful in the material world. Krishna tries to remedy that particular psychology in the Bhagavad Gita by telling us that there is no place from the highest planet down to the lowest place where you're actually going to have any success here in the material world. Okay, so then he says, Tanmayata Buddha abhajatam bhaktyaka yesha gurudevatatma. So what's the solution to the problem? Turn around. You're facing in the wrong direction. Couldn't be simpler. So you're facing the wrong direction, away from Krishna. Now what's the solution? Turn around. Turn around and face Krishna. And the way that one does that is by becoming a servant of Krishna. Become a servant of Krishna. And this solves all the problems that when one develops the attitude of a servant. So let's just talk for a couple minutes about what the attitude of a servant is. What does it mean to have the attitude of a servant, to be a servant of Krishna? Yes.
You mentioned this in previous classes. Everything is for Krishna, nothing is for me.
Yeah, that was Prabhupada's motto. Everything for Krishna, nothing for me. Everything for Krishna, nothing for me. Try it. Try it out for size. And it sounds a little scary because there's a way in which I think I'm my body, and therefore I'm clinging to survival in this material world. And every scrap of food that somebody else is getting that I'm not getting means maybe I'll die or something like that. But actually, when one actually takes shelter of Krishna and sees that Krishna is protecting us, then it becomes more and more desirable to enter into that mood of surrender. Everything for Krishna, nothing for me. What else is the attitude of a servant? Yes.
I remember what Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, 6 symptoms. Anukulasya sankalpa pratikulasya varjita rakshishyati iti vishvaso, and so on and so forth, where he says that Krishna is the only maintainer. So like even in local India villages, when there is a great landlord and there is a teeny tiny servant, and that servant actually thinks that I am completely being maintained by that landlord. An inch here and I won't be maintained. So that kind of attitude which the servant has, then it's completely dependent, and then out of gratitude that servant will render selfless service. If he thinks that no, I have maybe 1% stake outside, then that won't be sufficient.
It's nice to know also, isn't it, that the servant actually lives even at a higher standard than the master. Because the master has to worry about stuff. And the servant just like, that's his business, I just serve him. But the master maintains the servant. He lives in the same area, he gets quarters and so forth, but he doesn't have all the anxiety of the master. It's really hard being the master, but being the servant is, because it's my constitutional position, it's easy. And just being maintained by Krishna is a very appealing prospect, because it's very, very difficult to maintain oneself in this material world. Mukharvind. Thank you, Harivamsha. That was nice.
How to please his master? Because if what pleases his master most, and thinking 24 hours how to fulfill that desire.
Yeah, that's nice. That's related to spiritual ambition, and the ambition of a servant is to see how nicely he or she can serve the master. And there's so much ambition in that. You just see in our Panchratchiki system, where the devotees, for instance, for a festival, they plan for weeks and months how to decorate the temple and how they're going to organize the festival to please Krishna, what things they're going to cook and so forth. There's so much spiritual ambition in there. And who's it for? It's to please Krishna. And then on the day of the big festival, they come in and they're making this huge feast, and what do the servants do? They fast. Now that's sweet. They just fast, and they just work for Krishna all day long, and they cook for Krishna, and they make flowers, and they don't even want to smell them. They want Krishna to smell them first, not until he smelled them. This is the attitude of the servant, and it's actually fulfilling. It actually fills up the heart. One becomes fully satisfied. Whereas as soon as one thinks, let me enjoy these things, immediately the anxiety starts. Immediately. Prahlad Maharaj. In the 7th canto, you're going to say it. Go ahead, you tell.
I was just going to say that verse of Srila Prahlad Maharaj, who says that if you decorate your body, the reflection is automatically decorated. So if you please Krishna, then you're automatically pleased. You don't have to do separate endeavor.
Yes. That's a beautiful verse that perfectly fits this idea about how we are little reflections of Krishna. And when we actually decorate Krishna, we become decorated ourselves. And I was thinking about the verse in which Prahlad Maharaj tells his classmates that the moment you start thinking about material enjoyment, you didn't even start doing it, you just started thinking about it. That's when you start experiencing misery. And the way to avoid that is have spiritual ambition, which means to be ambitious as a servant. Well, how much can I do for my spiritual master? How much can I do for Krishna? You can see from Prabhupada's life how ambitious he was. I mean, he wrote 60 plus books while he traveled all around the world and wrote thousands of letters to individuals all over the world, managed a movement, etc., etc., etc. That requires ambition, but none of it was material. It was all spiritual ambition, and his motto was, everything for Krishna, nothing for me. What else? The mentality of a servant. It's actually even nice talking about it, isn't it? How to be a better servant. What are you studying? What's your master's in? I'm studying how to be a better servant of Krishna.
I was just thinking that the Ishavasya verse is also it's relevant for a servant. Like if you know that everything belongs to Krishna and he has given you your quota, and we should be satisfied with that and not look at what others their property. And then I think in the second verse it said that one who believes in this and follows this way can live hundreds of years without getting entangled. So,
perfect. Nice citations. These two verses solve all our problems, don't they? Can you quote the Sanskrit on those two verses, please?
The second one I don't know. Maybe I'll open it.
Okay, we'll help you out. Just do the first one.
Ishavashyamidam sarvam yat kinchad jagatyam jagatena tyaktena bhunjita magridha kashyasvidhanam. Kurvane veha karmani jijivishek chatam samaha evam tvai nanyate tosti na karma lipyate nare.
Give us the translation of the second one.
One may aspire to live for hundreds of years if he continuously goes on working in that way, for that sort of work will not bind him to the law of karma. There is no alternative to this way for man.
Nice. Yeah, there's no alternative to this way for man. Be a servant mentality. Now we have from the internet. Let's hear who we have.
So Maharaj, we have Jugnu from Wisconsin.
Oh, really? That's fantastic.
Yeah. So there were actually two texts. One was from some of the things that we can do in the morning. So the quotation was that we can also recite Ishopanishad mantra 18, the last mantra.
Yes. Agne Naya Supatarayasman Vishvani Deva Vayanani Vidvan Yuyod Yasmash Juharanameno Bhuishtam Te Nama Uktim Videma. O my Lord, as powerful as fire, omnipotent one, now I offer you all obeisances and fall on the ground at your feet. Please lead me on the right path to reach you. And since you all know all that I have done for you, please remember all my sacrifices. Yes.
And then on the attitude of a servant. So thinking, before every action, thinking and asking yourself that will this action please Krishna? So doing that constant check.
That's a nice test. Will this be pleasing to Krishna? This is the test one should do. There are a lot of decisions to make in life, aren't there? Or is it just me? You all don't have to make decisions? If you ever build anything, too, they say there's more decisions per minute than any other thing. Anybody ever built anything? Remodeled a kitchen or something like that? Just all the time. It's like, hey, you couldn't get those tiles. You got to use something else. We don't want anything else. It's the life. If you count them up, there's billions of decisions you have to make. So one of the ways to make those decisions with precision and to have peace of mind while doing it is to decide what's most beneficial for my service, because I'm a servant. What's the best way that I can serve Krishna, this one or this one? And if you choose the one that's better for your service, then you'll never make a mistake in making the decision. Servant's attitude, yes. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Maharaj, one thing I can come in my mind is no reservation. There should be no reservation in the heart.
There should be no reservation in the heart?
Yeah, like any other. About anything, like whatever order comes there, sometimes we have our own preference. Okay, I have this way to do something, but when order comes, how to execute that order rather than thinking.
So the first part you said you have reservation because?
Yeah, because we are not completely surrendered. We think that okay, there may be, then my master doesn't know. I know better than him. So that kind of attitude can be there. That not absolute.
Yeah, and we could see examples of devotees even in the modern day. You know, there was a difficult social situation with ISKCON. I guess it was 1976 or 75. It was 1975, and I won't go into all the details. I'll just cut right to the part that's really interesting. One of the leading sannyasis in our movement had an idea about how to help the movement in one way, and a lot of other people had an idea which was the opposite. And all of it came to Prabhupada at one point, and Prabhupada saw was speaking with this individual who was a very powerful leader, and he, out of sort of a feeling of maybe a discouragement or something like that, said, I might as well just go to China then. And of course, back then, China was like, you couldn't even get in practically. It was like impossible place. He said, I'll just go to China. And Prabhupada said, yes, you should go to China. He said, Krishna has spoken through you. And he's like, no, Prabhupada, I was just kidding. He said, no, you should go to China. And did he go to China? Yes, he did. He actually went to China. One of the things he did when he went there, just a little trivia, he was so intelligent, how to start the movement there, because you couldn't openly do anything there. Practically, you still can't. Satyadev goes to China all the time. We won't say it very loud, because who knows who's listening. But he would go to bookstores, and he would go to the section of the bookstore that had metaphysical books, and he would just stand there and wait. And when some Chinese person would come in there and start going through the books, he'd start up a conversation because he figured this person was interested. But anyway, point was that it was an impossible situation, but because the order came, And he said, it's an impossible thing to do, but I'll do it anyway. And I brought up the point about the printing 17 books in 2 months. I told about that marathon, and that was impossible. Actually, physically impossible. But because the order came from Prabhupada, the servant said, okay, I'll execute it. Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj used to say that when you receive an impossible order, but then you agree to do it anyway, that's when empowerment occurs. So servants get empowered when they take up the order, even though it's impossible. Yes.
Maharaj, second one, you mentioned in class the attitude of Govinda while serving Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Maybe you.
Govinda.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mean about the massage?
Yeah.
So in serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Govinda was appointed by his spiritual master, Madhavendra Puri, to take care, Srila Ishvara Puri, to take care of the personal needs and the body of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, even though he was a godbrother. So at first Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, no, I can't take service from you, you're a godbrother. So he said, he asked Swarup Damodar, who said, it was the order of your spiritual master, therefore you have to take the service. So that's a difficult thing, because someone comes and offers service, said, no, I'm a servant. No, so, no, but I'm your servant. He said, well, how to solve this? Said, well, the spiritual master said that I should serve you. It's like, okay. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, all right, you can serve, because our spiritual master said, you should be my servant. Okay, so then one day, one of the services that Govinda had for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was that he would give him a massage just after he would take prasad in the afternoon. And part of the rule was he'd give the massage, and then Govinda would go and take his prasad. And that would keep the schedule on time and everything moving perfectly. So one day, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took prasadam, and then he went to his little cabin where he was staying, and he was so tired, he went just inside the door and then lay down within the threshold and blocked the door. And he was rather large, over 7 feet tall, you know. And Govinda was on the outside, and he said, my Lord, I can't get in. I have to come in and give you a massage. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, you can come in or not come in. It's up to you. It's up to whatever you decide. I'm too tired. I can't move. And he went to sleep. So then a while later, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu woke up, and he saw that Govinda was there sitting. So what Govinda had done is taken a chadar and put it over the transcendental body of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then he had broken etiquette. He had made an offense, actually, by stepping over the transcendental body of the Lord. We shouldn't step over any book. We shouldn't step over any devotee. That's why when you move through a crowd, you're always supposed to put your hand down like this until somebody moves their knee. You know, you don't just climb in. You're careful. And if you accidentally bump into a devotee, like, please forgive me, so you don't step over. Especially, you don't step over the devotees, you don't step over Krishna, you don't step over Shastra. But he stepped over. And he gave the massage to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And then he sat there. And then when Mahaprabhu woke up, he said, Govinda, what are you doing in here? How come you didn't go take your lunch? And he said, you're blocking the door. And Mahaprabhu said, how did you get in here then? And Govinda didn't even answer verbally. And within his mind he answered, I'm willing to commit an offense and take the reaction for your service, but I'm not willing to step over, make an offense because of my own sense gratification to go take prasadam. And this is the quintessential attitude of the servant, that whatever it takes to serve my master, I'll do that. But if it involves some sense gratification on my part, then I'll just sit and wait. Yes, and brahmacharis are supposed to learn this early on when they live in the ashram, that if the guru doesn't call them for lunch, they don't take anything, they just fast. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. So a couple of points on the attitude of the servant. For the first one being that they are willing to take risks and go any longer distance and take risks for their service. And the second thing is they're looking for more service.
That's right. This is part of spiritual ambition, as servants look for more service, because that's what they do. That's their right, to get more service, and they try to get more and more service. And so this fulfills the natural propensity that we have as living entities for ambition. It's normally in the material world in a contaminated way, filtered through this idea of lust, everything for me. But when the devotee becomes ambitious for service, then he or she thinks of all different ways to minimize his or her own sense gratification and regulate the senses so he or she can do better service for Krishna, more service. So you can become greedy for service, so you can do more. And we'll take one more, and then we're going to have a kirtan before we have a kirtan.
There should be no opposition in the mind of the servant.
No opposition in
or
the mind.
hostility in the mind of the servant. Like whatever has been ordered should be fulfilled.
Yes. Yeah. Take the order and fulfill the order. And this is mentioned in the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, something I've said millions of times because I like it so much. And that is that the direct order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is a manifestation of His internal potency. And it is by that particular potency that one comes to see the Lord face to face. So if one takes the order of the spiritual master and simply holds on to that order, no matter how simple it may seem to be, and keeps that in one's life, throughout one's life, and tries to fulfill it to the best of one's ability, then that's like a rope. It will drag one past all the obstacles of the material world and right into the spiritual world. And now, yes, we can sneak in one more.
I was thinking about loyalty.
And how were you thinking about that?
A servant is loyal to the master. Similarly, when we are serving Krishna, we should be loyal and stay fixed in with Krishna and not have multi-branched, today I'm doing
Bhakti
this.
Vinod Thakur admires the characteristics of a dog. And then he says, I want to be loyal servant like the dog is loyal servant. Dogs are very loyal, And he said, I'll just, you treat me as your dog, and you tie me up in the back porch. Tie me up back there, and then I will ward off anybody who comes to disturb you. And for my food, whatever you don't eat, you just throw over the balcony, and that's what I'll take, those scraps. The dogs are so loyal. Okay, we're on a roll.
But also, the mood of a devotee is that he or she never thinks that they're capable of doing any service for their master, but they always feel that they're incapable, and always they pray, how can I serve my master? How can I serve my master? And if something good really happens, they just give the credit to their master rather than thinking that.
Isn't that a fact? There's a whole science to this, isn't there? I mean, you could really study how to become a quintessential servant of Krishna. And this is one of the main points I'm making tonight, is that this is very practical. And not only is it practical, it fulfills the heart's desire to serve Krishna, to serve the spiritual master. So if one makes a study of what a servant is and becomes spiritually ambitious to serve more and more, to refine one's service, one would become happy. And the other very practical point is, never greet the dawn without a map. Write it down and decide what you're going to do. Because if you don't decide ahead of time and write it down, then your mind and senses are going to decide for you, and that's not a pretty sight. You can wake up 27 years later and think, what happened to that last 27 years I was on Facebook? I go Premanande.
Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, hey, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman.